American War, a novel by Omar El Aked. Armchair Prepper reads. What I like to do is read these books and give you some prepper stuff from it. From that angle, it's a little bit of a disappointment. There isn't really much useful information in this book from a prepper point of view. The book, as I thought it would be, is an amazing read, and I blew through it really quickly. Kitty's halfway through it, and she's really enjoying it as well. It's a brilliant book, and it's worth reading, whether you're a prepper or not. But in the interest of Armchair Prepper, I'll do you some stuff on it without trying to get too many spoilers, because it's a brilliant book. I belong to what they call the miraculous generation, those born in the years between the start of the Second American Civil War in 2074 and its end in 2095. Some extended the definition further, including those born during the decade-long plague that followed the end of the war. It is estimated 11 million people died in the war, and almost 10 times that number died in the plague that followed. Now, the Second American Civil War is a common trope in literature. It's also a common trope online, on fear porn sites. I personally don't think America is going to embark upon a civil war in the near future. But 2074 is far enough away that this cannot be discounted. It gives you a description of how people live in a resource-depleted, soil-eroded, global warmed world. And for that it's useful. 100 feet from the western riverbank, the chestnuts lived in a corrugated steel container salvaged from the nearby shipyard. A lattice of old-fashioned solar panels lined the entirety of the roof, save for one corner occupied by a rain tank. A tarp rested near the panels. And it talks about how they keep them clean and how they look after what they do for power, how they do for food, what they do for labour and all that sort of stuff. A world is very similar to, but very different from ours. When it's talking about the separationists, the South, they were to a man untrained and ill-equipped, and ahead of them to the west lay certain death at the hands of a superior army, the North. But behind them, in the dead-end towns where they were born, lay a slower kind of death, death at the hands of poverty and boredom and decay. So bear in mind, Civil War is an interesting fact, and although many people try to link this book to Donald Trump, I think it's got zero to do with Donald Trump. I think it's actually got zero to do with modern blue versus red states, although the geography is the same. The rationale for the war is entirely different. I don't want to get into it too much, I don't want to spoil it. You really need to read this. You can use Audible. Read it. Text. Good. It was in the end hopeless work, the letters almost always doomed to fail. But the refugees who paid or begged Martina to write these pleadings on their behalf, hopelessness was no impediment to hope. It talks about the beginning of the war, it talks about poverty where they lived, it talks about entering a FEMA camp Patience, because you have to be really patient to stand it. It talks about the dangers that the North face, the southern population face from the North. It talks about the dangers the population who aren't quite South, but are Southerners, face from the Southerners. So there is no, it's a nihilist book, there is no good and bad in this. You can root for many people in this book, but basically you're going to root for the protagonist, Sarah T. Chestnut, who goes by the name of Sarat. She liked that. It was a spelling mistake by a school teacher when she went to school. And you're going to root for her and you're going to see her grow up. It's a coming-of-age book in a lot of ways. You're not going to really learn how to prep. A few little bits and pieces in it tell you that you should store large amounts of food and stay away from people in a pandemic that happens at the end of the book. But you should know that by now. If you've got 3 months supply of MREs, you really need a couple of years supply of dry goods and food and tins, and you may have space and problems. Don't buy expensive food, buy food that can last and you can use. And that's my takeaway from a prepping angle from the book. Now, as I said, I'm not going to leave any spoilers out. So this is from the prepping bit. She tapped the storm-sheltered door with her walking stick. We lived in that little hole, Billy's father and I, for 18 months, she said, lived off canned food, relieved ourselves in a little makeshift bucket we carried out once a week in the dead of night. Almost 2 whole years like that, until there were too many dead here for the sickness to keep moving. Jesus, I said, that must have been hell. That's right, the old woman replied. And we were the only ones from around here who survived, because we were the only ones who drove to every store from here to 3 towns over, buying every last can of beans and bottle of water we could find, preparing for it. So you will find out why there's a plague. You'll find out who started the plague. The book doesn't really go into details of the plague, which is good. I'm hoping he does a follow-up book from a different character's point of view, looking at the plague years and also the war years. So yeah, you can read this book as a prepping book and you're not going to get a lot out of it. And that's unfortunate, because this is really dystopian. This is very dystopian. What you will get out of this, all right, there's some stuff that I missed. It came in a plain silver packet and once had been part of a military ration kit. In the South, such kits, sold or discarded or given away, inevitably found their way to the grey market, where they were ripped open and their parts sold off individually. It was highly prized food, not for its taste, because of its utility, the energy it provided. These are MREs. China and the Middle East are the 2 ascendant superpowers here. They both have interest in keeping America down. They both have interest in starting and prolonging the Civil War. But it's not a main feature of this book, but geopolitical is definitely important. Now, one of the spoilers I'm going to give you now, I don't want to, but I'm going to, so turn this off if you're going to read this book. Early in the war, the birds were the Union's most effective weapon, till a group of rebels detonated a bomb at the military server farm that kept the drones under the control of their remote pilots. Now, the machines, powered by the solar panels that lined their wings, flew rogue, abandoned to the skies. Their targets and trajectories random. So these are drones, autonomous drones, freed from control of servers. That's an issue you might want to think about. We all know in terms of war, whether civil or international, that certain targets will be priority targets for an enemy. I think fairly likely anywhere that has drone control capacity in the United States Air Force and Army will be hit and hit hard early on. So if you live close to a drone control area, and you can kind of guess where they are and also look them up to some degree online, you might want to relocate strategically. Right, so that's it. This is a 5 out of 5 for a read. It's about a 2 out of 5 as a prepping book. It's a 5 out of 5 for the psychology and society of a massive SHTF that has not seen society fall. Society is really creaky in the book, but it has not fallen. There is governments, and governments do have power, and that stays the same throughout the book. The book ends on a bit of a hopeful note in the future. The characters in the book are there to show us the futility of war. So if you enjoy war and think it's a fun thing to do, you might not like the book. Hope you read it. I really do. Let me know what you think below. Do a VR on it. It's a great book. Au revoir.
Generals gathered in their masses, just like witches at black masses. Evil minds that plot destruction